基金会，它几乎是成为美国司法界头最容易或最喜欢或者最敢跟美国政府打官司的一个基金会。那Daniel O'Brien 是20多年来，他是目前是电子权基金会的策略长。他20多年来一直从事线上的言论自由跟保护隐私的活动。在英国，他抵制那个反加密法的镇压，并协助了英国的数字人权组织，叫做 Open Rights Group。他在2005年到2007年也为电子权基金会一个主要的活动家。那在2007到2009年后，组织国际的有点像是推广运动的协调员。2013年到2019年，担任该组织的国际主任。他现在主管 EFF 的中长期的发展策略，致力于维护该组织在国际影响力跟议题的推动者这样。那其实上个世纪Daniel 不只是作为一个运动的组织者跟推广者，他甚至参与，比如他的写作和参与表演的关于那个 Usenet， 我们那个年代几乎每个人都会用的那个一个很像 BBS 的这样的一个网络的东西。他举行了一场单人秀的表演，在那个伦敦西区大获成功，所以他也编了一本杂志叫Gossip， 不是各位想象的那种八卦杂志。那这个 Gossip 杂志有一篇文章叫 Need to Know， 对不对？他应该讲他的季课 Gossip 杂志有Need to Know， 在首届的英国电影学院交互作品的颁奖会中获得新闻收集特别推荐服务奖。那它也是 life hack， 就我们常会说，我们有一种叫做真正的 hack， 害到网络里头。那有一种是 life hack， 就我们要害回我们的生活，拿回我们的生活。然后他最近正在写一本书，这本书大概是我最需要的一本书，叫做关于抵抗拖延症的书。那么我们现在就有请我们就欢迎Daniel O'Brien。Hi, welcome. It's so nice we have you here.
Hey, can you hear me? Just wave gently if you can hear me. Okay, people are waving. That's a good sign. Yeah, I'm Danny O'Brien. I'm from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. You can stop waving. It's okay. EFF was founded in 1990 to defend digital privacy, free speech, and innovation online by, I think, some of the internet's first users and creators. One of them, John Perry Barlow, was quite a famous musician. He wrote song lyrics for the Grateful Dead, but I think he's best known in the internet space for writing the Declaration of Independence of cyberspace. Let me actually just, I'm not sure if this will work, but I'll just put in a link to a translation of the Declaration in Chinese so you can read that, because his poetry is a little better than my spoken word. The Declaration is an inspirational document. It was written in 1996. It's not a technical guide. It's not a set of laws. And, you know, I have to say that I'm not sure I could say that EFF as an organization agrees with every part of the poetry of one of our founders, or any particular small part of it. If you were to pick it apart, it's very much a flawed document in some ways, even at the moment of its creation. But as a description of a certain way of thinking about the internet, I do find it useful. Late at night, when you're, and it's quite late at night here, when you're very excited about the future of the decentralized internet, I think we all think in some of its terms. And sometimes when we worry that the internet, when digital technology is failing to live up to its promise, I think the promise that we're thinking about is embedded in those very early, somewhat utopian terms. One idea that is touched on in the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, but was also very prevalent throughout a lot of the 1990s and early 2000s regarding the internet, is about borders. The idea of the internet as a place that's entirely without borders is a very powerful idea. Certainly, it's always felt from the first time you use it that it's quite an artificial, it's quite a false thing to try to impose geographical borders on it. It doesn't matter right now that I happen to be in San Francisco, or you happen to be where you are, or someone else happens to be tuning into this in Shanghai or Africa. When I speak these words, you can hear them, and I can see your questions and see your appearance in the chat. Distance and mountains and the ocean don't really matter that much to digital information, not automatically. And I think we sort of instinctively understand that. And so much of the enthusiasm of the early net has been to take advantage of this difference between previous forms of communication and the possibility of this digital world. Some of the power that a decentralized internet offers, some of the power of being able to cooperate and work together comes from the fact that there are no borders. So if one person is enthusiastic about a particular topic or a particular project, they can cooperate and work together as equals with someone else on the other side of the world. And I think that's one of the engines that allows decentralized projects to compete and complement and grow past the great centralized projects, which of course are always tied in some ways to geography. Also, some of the many problems that the internet and its users have suffered from in the last 30 to 40 years is exactly this, that there are no borders. Countries, including China, including Europe and the United States, have struggled in the face of the internet's open plains to reimpose the borders of legal jurisdiction and national sovereignty. The advantage of being able to hear from everybody simultaneously has turned for many into a sort of hell, a cacophony of voices where those closest to you can seem quite alien, and those furthest away from you seem to want to watch and criticize everything you do. So there are wins and losses in this particular innate aspect of the internet. The borders and barriers that I'm going to talk about today aren't really about international borders or nation-state borders that seem so unnatural to digital technology. I think I'm going to talk about the borders that actually seem very natural at one level to the technology we've created, that they've seemed to have evolved of their own volition in network society as naturally and as inevitably, it appears, as the nation state did on planet Earth in previous centuries. I'm talking about the borders and walls between what is called in English the walled gardens. Every country has internet users who live in these walled gardens now, whether it's Twitter and Facebook or Amazon and Apple or Alibaba and Tencent. In the frontier of this electronic frontier we're talking about, we now live behind very tall city walls. Walls can keep people safe. They can also prevent people from leaving. Cities are a sign of civilization as people gather together to do work. But when cities with walls appear in the archaeological record, it's usually a sign that something has gone wrong, whether that's China or the end of the Roman Empire. the feeling of space, of open space, of cyberspace of the early internet was because it did not have that feeling of walls. John Perry Barlow was fighting against governments creating walls in this new world, but walls aren't just built by governments, and governments are not the only, to quote his lines, weary giants of blood and steel that can plague us. In fact, before the internet, the very early digital world did have its walled cities. In the United States, there were companies like America Online and CompuServe that offered computer systems that you could connect to, but were separate from each other and the rest of the early internet. There were lots of different protocols and standards in Europe and North America, in the Soviet Union, in China, and not just one internet protocol that we could all use. No, I'm not using slides. It's just my giant face, I'm afraid. So there were lots of different protocols and standards in Europe and North America, not just one internet protocol. But the one that succeeded, the internet protocol, TCP/IP, succeeded because it set out to connect all the others together. The phrase internet came from the idea of a network of networks. The internet protocols we use today were built so that you could connect alien topologies and alien networks together, and they could still reach out. They could tunnel through TCP/IP to meet equivalent networks. You still see the skeletons of these older proprietary technologies in today's TCP/IP. They're not needed now because by providing a protocol that interconnected between all of these others, the advantages of the smaller networks diminished and everyone began to use the common denominator that connected them all. The same thing actually happened with the rise of the web. The first web browser did understand HTML, but it also understood and could display all of the web's early competing standards. The file transfer protocol, FTP, Gopher was another one, and Usenet, the particular protocol I apparently wrote a West End show about. There were no songs, I'm sorry. So the early web browser gave you roads to every city, even those that had walls of their own. It gave you a passport to visit all of those isolated and remote vistas. So right now, we're in another time of warring kingdoms. The city walls have risen again. Why hasn't a new internet, a new web browser emerged to unite them? And by this, I mean that people are stuck in Facebook, talking only to people who are on Facebook. People are stuck in WeChat, only able to talk to other people on WeChat. And though they can move between those two cities, it's very hard to take their belongings with them or create a new city away from these giant metropolises. So why haven't we been able to connect them together? Why haven't we been able to build upon them in the same way as the early internet protocols and the early web browsers were able to bypass their predecessors? Well, protocols are certainly a lot more complicated now. Facebook spends a lot of money changing its mind about how its systems work and does not tell anyone else how it has changed those systems. Each of these giants has a little group of commoners, of villagers, sharecropping peasants who work within the city walls using the application programming interfaces, the APIs that the city elders very generously offer them. It's a good life in many ways. You have your app that you've written to interface with WeChat, or your Google integration, or your Android app, or your iPhone app, and you know, life is good in your little protected feudal kingdom. It would be a lot of work to reverse engineer how these companies present, absorb, and output the information of their participants and connect them all back together again, especially especially with their help, without their help. And these companies really do not want to help. These walls keep their customers inside these cities. The fact that those customers live in those cities is what gives them their power. They want them to stay, and they want them to stay forever. I mean, if you want to get an idea of how complicated this idea is, look at how complicated a web browser is. Chrome and its siblings are the same size these days as an operating system, and that's what it takes to interpret everybody's isolated websites. Web browsers used to let you travel between destinations, between websites. Now you can't even travel very easily between web browsers. They've become a sort of walled city of themselves. And if the technology complexity makes it harder to break down walls now, so does the law. These companies, and trust me, I know this, have a lot of lawyers. Electronic Frontier Foundation has lawyers too, and we deploy them against governments and presidents as necessary, and also against companies, but we don't have as many as Google and Facebook do. In the United States, companies are always trying to claim that if you connect to their systems without the right kinds of permissions, you are not only breaking their terms of service, but also breaking the law. At EFF, we fight these cases. For instance, you may have heard earlier this year that the Recording Industry of America, the RIAA, told GitHub.com to take down YouTube DL, which was a program for, still is, a program for downloading YouTube videos. We at EFF fought this attack. We managed to persuade GitHub to restore that program, but plenty of companies try the same trick with software that interoperates with their services in other ways. Really, just recently, actually just today, there's a post on EFF.org where my colleague Mitch, who also participated in the YouTube DL case, had to take the same kind of action against Facebook, because Facebook was sending a letter to an app called Friendly. And Friendly just provides a friendly front end to Facebook. It strips out all the distractions and gives you just what you want. And Facebook is claiming that that is a violation not only of their rules, but of the rules of the land. And similarly, they've tried to do the same thing when in the United States, a university tried to track what political advertisements were appearing on Facebook by watching the data that emitted from them and encouraging people to install a plugin that would monitor how they were being targeted. Facebook claims that this is, again, a misuse of their website. Sometimes these companies even say that code like this is hacking their websites, and they try to get the programmers arrested under criminal prosecution. And this happens all around the world, even though these programs and these services are only using Facebook or whatever in exactly the same way as customers would access that data on in a web browser. So if the companies that preceded the internet could have sued the first internet pioneers for the very daring and audacious act of interoperating with them, the internet really would never have happened. We would be living in the walled cities of a previous era. If the makers of Gopher and FTP and Usenet had sued Tim Berners-Lee and the creators of the World Wide Web for daring to use a radical new piece of client software, the World Wide Web could never have occurred. And I'm happy to say, for the most part, and I know this because we live in the present, that they did not sue or stop those developments because it never really occurred to them. They put the ideals of digital technology, those ideals that are embodied in the Declaration of independence of cyberspace, and also some of the descriptions of the technologies that you've heard before me today. These ideals of letting us all talk to each other freely and as peers and without borders or walls, before the idea of stopping us talking together really emerged. So again, why isn't this happening now? Where are the programmers saying, pull down these walls? Is it the Great Firewall of China? Or is it President Trump and his walls and TikTok lawsuits and so on? Perhaps this sort of rhetoric can add to the zeitgeist. It does make us perhaps feel less horrified by walls in the digital domain when we see them springing up in the real world. But I actually feel that it's because we've yet to quite decide to declare independence from these new walled city-states. I have, when I last counted, 44 incompatible chat apps on my phone. Not just WeChat and WhatsApp and Signal, but YouTube has an internal chat system. Twitter, of course, lets you DMs. TikTok has one. Facebook actually has 3 mutually incompatible chat systems that they're trying to put together. I'm pretty sure Google has even more of those. Every app that I have lets you talk on it, but not between them. If I wrote an app that would link all of those chat services together, I'm not entirely sure that Google or Apple would let it onto their app stores. And is that a problem? I don't know. I think to hell with their app stores, and to hell with all those phone companies who stick their rubbish app stores on the phones too. What we need is a people's app store that connects all the other app stores together, whether they grant you permission or not. Everywhere you look, there are more walls to break down. In America and Europe right now, EFF is talking to regulators who do want to lessen the monopoly control of Google, Facebook, and Apple to make it easier for coders and entrepreneurs to interoperate with these giants without fear of legal sanction. We call the principle that would permit them to do that competitive compatibility or adversarial interoperability. We kind of oscillate between the two of those. Actually, lawmakers like it. I think they understand that this is something that may help dissolve the monopolies that they see emerging online. I see it as a way to recreate that decentralized web and recreate that decentralized internet. I see these moments of centralization as sort of blood clots in the body politic. And I think the best way to dissolve those blood clots is to let the antibodies touch on them. Let programmers and technologists reach into these systems and pull out what we need from them and rewire and rewrite the things that we don't need from them. And I know this is technologically challenging, and we speak all the time with people who are working individually to break down these walls, but it's hard work. It requires that level of, it requires a new level of coordination, of decentralized effort. It's technologically challenging, even in a moment where we have all this technology at our fingertips. But, I think we're good at solving technological problems with technology. Reverse engineers really have great software now, if you talk to them. If machine learning can see a face in a constantly changing video, perhaps machine learning can also see a stable application programming interface in a constantly changing binary executable. What we need to do is surround these walled cities, to change my metaphor slightly. We need to trap them in our virtual machines. We need to study them just as they try to trap us in their apps and watch our every moments. John Perry Barlow wrote to the governments of the 1990s that I address you with no greater authority than that which liberty itself always speaks. I declare the global social space we are building to be naturally independent of the tyrannies you seek to impose on us. You have no moral right to rule us, nor do you possess any methods of enforcement that we have true reason to fear. I say that we say the same to the centralized corporations of the 21st century in their crystal prisons. The solutions to wars is always roads and bridges. Let's build some together. Thank you.